I realize in this day and age that hitchhiking is not a safe activity, but when you have no money, no car and public transport costs are exorbitant, the cheapest way to get around was to hitchhike. I had planned to go up the coast of Western Australia to find work for a few months. I had grown tired of the winter weather, and at this time of the year Shark Bay seemed like a good place to be. I had been staying at a shared house and it was getting to me, so now was the time to hit the road. I packed up my few belongings into my backpack and got a lift to the outskirts of Perth. Being a woman was easier when hitchhiking because we in general are less threatening, so I was not worried about getting a ride. I carried basic tools, including a pocket knife in case I had to defend myself. I believed I could look after myself as I had learned self-defense and worked out at the gym whenever I got the opportunity. I was pretty self-confident in my abilities and thought I was a pretty good judge of character, so before I ever got in a stranger's car or truck, I checked the person out. It wasn't long before a car pulled up and an elderly lady called out to me.
"Where are you heading?"
I replied, "I'm on my way to Shark Bay."
"Well, I can take you as far as Lancelin. Will that do?"
"That would be great. Thanks so much for this." The lady's car boot opened and she indicated for me to put my bag in. I was a little dubious about putting my bag into the boot, but considering her age and size, I did not think I had anything to worry about and threw it in, then got into the passenger seat and we hit the road. The elderly woman started the conversation.
"You know, it's not very safe hitchhiking up this highway. I hope you do realize that a number of women have gone missing up this way, and they have never been found."
"Yeah," I replied, acknowledging her statement, but not wanting to have this conversation. I turned my head towards the passenger window and looked out. I saw the woman glance at me from my peripheral vision, and she continued on.
"I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I feel it's my civic duty to warn you. There are dangerous opportunists out here who will take advantage of whoever they can. I would hate to think something might happen to you."
I turned my head towards the lady and replied, "Thanks for the advice and I will be careful, I promise you." The elderly lady seemed satisfied with my response and smiled. She reached over with one hand and patted my arm.
"Good to hear."
The landscape changed and we were soon passing by large farms with fields of sheep and crops intermixed with coastal scrub. We arrived in Lancelin and the elderly lady let me out at the petrol station. I thanked her for the ride and walked into the petrol station to use their toilet facilities. I grabbed a drink and a bite to eat. Then I hit the road again. The wind was up and I was not keen on getting wind blasted as I walked along the highway for my next leg of the journey. So I hoped it would not be long before my next ride came along. I stuck my thumb out and walked along the edge of the highway north towards Geraldton. I hoped to at least get that far by the end of the day. I was tired of being windblown, so it was a relief when a truck pulled up ahead of me. The passenger door of the truck opened up and a bloke said,
"Where are you headed, love?"
I climbed up onto the ledge of the truck and said, "Geraldton, if you're going that far?" The truckee replied,
"I am. Hop in and I'll give you a lift."
I got in and we hit the road. It was a relief to be out of the wind and back on the road. The truckie's name was Bob and he seemed like a good bloke. He had an old Kelpie dog who was stretched out in the cabin part behind the seats snoring away. The dog was obviously the truckie's mate and well and truly used to doing the long hauls. Bob chatted away, telling me stories about his life and about his job as a truck driver. He was a nice bloke and I felt comfortable hitching a ride with him. He had a big flask of coffee and offered to share it with me. I thanked Bob and poured him and myself a cup of coffee and settled back in the seat, getting myself into a comfortable position. The hours went by and I must have drifted off into a semi-state of sleep. I didn't know where I was going to camp for the night, so it was good to be able to rest comfortably for a couple of hours. I woke up when I felt the truck suddenly slowing down and looked around. Bob said,
"You awake yet, Sleeping Beauty?"
I smiled and replied, "I dunno about Sleeping Beauty, but yes, I am awake now." Bob responded saying that one of the truck's tires had blown, so he had to stop. I got out of the truck while Bob was replacing the tire. Just like me, his dog was grateful for the stopover, as it was a good time to take a toilet break and stretch my legs. I was keen to have a bit of privacy, so I walked into the scrubland to find a decent-sized shrub to get behind. I did my business and was carefully picking my way back through the scrub when a car pulled up behind Bob's truck. I could see a couple of blokes were having a conversation with Bob while he continued to change the truck tire. Suddenly, one of the blokes hit Bob with a tire lever over the back of his head. I let out a yell of shock and they turned and saw me. One of the blokes started coming towards me, so I turned and ran in the direction of the coastline, going deeper into the bush. I heard a loud yelp from Bob's old Kelpie and realized that the poor dog must have taken a hit as well, trying to protect Bob. I did not look back, but kept running as fast as I could, going deeper into the bush, hoping that the bloke would stop looking for me and go back. I eventually put enough distance between myself and the guy chasing me and hid in the undergrowth. I was not going to come out until they had gone, as I did not want to be their next victim. I stayed hidden until it was dark and then slowly stood up and looked around to see if I could see any movement from the direction of where I had run. There was silence, just the sound of the wind and the rustling of the bushes. I could see in the far distance the occasional headlight, but nothing more. So I made my way up to the top of the sand dune to get a rough idea of how far away I was to the road. I must have been about 2 kilometers from the road and would have to pick my way carefully back and hope Bob would be okay. I was thirsty and feeling dehydrated, and the wind was whipping the sand up into my eyes. The sea breeze was now blowing a gale, and I constantly had to cover my eyes to stop them getting sand blasted. Every few minutes I had to stop and orientate myself as to where the main road was by looking for headlights. When I caught a glimpse of something, my heart lurched and my stomach twisted into a knot. When I realized someone was still around, I ducked back down and hid behind a bush while I tried to get a look at who it was. To my surprise, it was a young woman about my age. She was walking towards me as if she knew exactly where I was. I didn't know whether to start running again or to stay hidden in the dark, but decided that if I had to fight, then so be it. I was not going down without giving it my best shot. As she got closer, I could see her hair length went down past her shoulders and her face was very white, almost translucent. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt and seemed to have no trouble finding her way through the dark without tripping or stumbling over anything. I figured that maybe she was local to the area and maybe Bob had told someone I was here. The closer she came, I could feel the hairs on my arms go up and put it down to my fight or flight response. When she got to the sand dune in front of me, she motioned with her arm to me. She definitely knew where I was hiding, so I stood up to get a better look at the woman. She then turned away from me and started walking back in the direction she had come from. I followed behind at a safe distance, still somewhat unsure about her intentions, as I could not see any headlights or sign of Bob's truck. I called out to her and said, "Hey, who are you?" The woman looked back over her shoulder but did not reply. She motioned again with her arm and continued to walk back in the direction of the road. I don't know how she seemed to be able to see so well in the night without stumbling in the scrub, but I put it down to local knowledge and picked up my pace to try and catch up to her. She obviously did not want to speak to me, which was odd, and I was still feeling very jittery about everything, so all I could do was make sure that I had enough adrenaline to make another run for it. We were about halfway back to the road when the woman disappeared over a large sand dune. I climbed up the dune and looked over, but she was gone. I scanned around, but nothing. It was like she had disappeared into thin air. I was mystified and well and truly freaked out. I could not see any vehicles in the car park and Bob's truck was gone. I wondered if he had been found and taken to hospital. I doubted anyone knew that I had been in the truck with Bob unless he had been conscious, which I doubted, as that blow to the back of his head, even from a distance, looked serious. I cautiously made my way down the sand dune when my foot connected with something solid. I immediately looked down to see what I had kicked and realized it wasn't a branch. It was bleached looking. I knelt down to take a closer look and picked up a bone. I lifted it up towards the light of the moon to get a good look and dropped it quickly back down. It looked like a human femur bone to me. I pushed the sand around with my foot and saw more bones poking out of the sand. I knelt down and began to dig around in the sand, pulling out bits of bone until I felt a skull. "Bloody hell," I said out loud as I picked up the human skull and lifted it up towards the moonlight to get a good look. When I realized it was definitely a skull, I dropped it back down onto the ground and let out a scream. The woman I had been following suddenly appeared directly in front of me, and I was now staring straight into her eyes. "Is this you?" I asked, and she nodded her head in response. My legs gave away, and I dropped back down once again into the sand, shaking like a leaf. The spirit of the woman motioned again to me to follow her, and she turned and began walking back towards the road. I followed her for about 200 meters when she suddenly stopped and pointed down. My heart lurched again because I realized that she must be pointing at something significant that I did not want to see. Hesitantly, I walked to where she was pointing. I could see a darkened shape on the ground and picked up my pace again. There, laying half buried under the sand, was Bob and his dog. I knelt down to touch Bob and see if he was alive or dead. I could smell the blood and see a dark stain at the back of his head with blood congealed in the sand. Bob had been laying there for a good couple of hours, so I didn't hold out any hope of him being alive, and I could see the poor dog was dead. I knelt down anyway just to check for a pulse, and much to my surprise, I felt faint signs of life. I stood back up and looked at the spirit of the woman, who was still intently looking at me. She pointed at the road, and I nodded my head in acknowledgement and began running for the highway. I had to stop someone and get Bob help before he died. Using every last bit of energy, I got to the highway and waved my arms madly at the oncoming traffic until I managed to stop a car. I ran to the driver's side and yelled out to the bloke to call the cops and an ambulance. I pointed in the direction of where I had run from and turned to go back to where I had left Bob. The guy yelled out to me to stop, but I could not. Bob needed help, and I did not want to leave him alone. I yelled back to send the emergency crew in the direction I was going in, and I made my way back to where Bob was laying in the sand dunes. Fortunately, it was not long before the emergency services turned up and Bob was on his way to hospital. I sat in the back of the ambulance while they checked me over. The cops were impatient to get me back to the police station so they could follow up and track down the thieves who had nearly murdered Bob and taken his truck. I kept trying to tell them about the ghost woman I had seen, but they thought I was rambling after being involved in this horrible crime. I was getting angry with them. I had not lost my mind and owed it to the ghost woman to give her rest. So instead of getting in the cop car, I started walking back out in the scrubland towards where I had found her bones. The cop said,
"Hang on and I will come with you."
He grabbed his torch and we started walking back into the scrubby bush.
"Are you sure you know where you're going?"
The cop asked me. I looked at him and responded, "Yes." I knew where I was going because leading the way was the spirit of the young woman lighting our path to her grave. We got to where her bones lay and she disappeared from my vision. The cop radioed in the burial site, and we then walked back to where the forensic investigation was taking place. I asked about Bob, and they said he had been flown back to Perth for treatment. It was touch and go for a few weeks for Bob, who had a brain injury and had to be kept in a coma until his swelling went down. I got to go and visit him and was thrilled to see he was well and truly on the road to recovery. The young woman whose bones I had found had been missing for about 5 years. She had been murdered, but as of yet her murderer had not been found. The guys who had hurt Bob and stolen his truck were caught and currently waiting trial. I buried Bob's dog in a proper grave, and when Bob got out of hospital, we went to visit the family of the murdered young woman. It was a very emotional time for us all, and hopefully one day there will be justice for her family. I do not hitchhike anymore, and my desire for roaming the countryside has subsided. It's amazing how a series of events can change our lives so dramatically.